Hey, it's Chris here of Border Trout Fitters. Today we're going to tie Eric Ishiwata's articulated snitch pattern. Now, I'm using RX barbless hooks here. These are curved nymph hooks, size 10. You want something that's going to have a fairly short shank. I've already got a bead on here, 5/32 in size, and I'm tying nano silk on here. And we're just going to go a little ways down the hook. We don't need to dress this thing in a big way. Now, this is a nice articulated pattern, mimics a leech pattern. I mean, very easy to tie. And I want to talk you through the setup process for this articulated fly because it has two hooks. Now what I've got here is basically a 30-pound fishing braid. I've got Power Pro on here. I've just doubled it up. I've fed it through the underside of the eye of the back hook and then over the back of the hook, and that locks it in place. I've slid it now under the bead and then through the eye of the front hook going down. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to reverse it. I'm going to go back through that bead. When you tie this down, this thing's going to be rock solid. There's no way that it's going to give. But if you feel like, adding some Zappa Gap and just locking it down, you can absolutely do that. Now, you don't want to have these hooks too far apart, okay? You only want about one hook's length in between the two hooks. That keeps this fly nice and compact. Here in Alberta, where we can fish up to 3 hooks, you could even then have this trailing behind a larger streamer, but I like to fish this on its own. It's going to have tons of movement with that articulation. So now some nice tight wraps of the nano silk to lock this down. Then we're going to clip off the end of that braid, and now we've got a really nice strong link between these two hooks. So now we're going to start dressing the front hook, and this is using a squirrel zonker strip. I like squirrel. You could certainly tie bigger rabbit strip on here, but I like the size of the squirrel for this size of fly. Just tying it down right in the front. We don't need a lot. You don't want this squirrel tail going way past the second hook. But always, of course, start with more squirrel tail than you think you'll need because you can always cut it short. You can never add more later. Now we're going to do a dubbing loop. I've just secured this in place here. And what we're going to do now is build up a body. Now, a lot of articulated snitches are tied with flash on the outside, but I actually like to have flash on the inside. So we're going to start with that. Then we're going to have a collar going over it. Putting in a half hitch to lock it in place. We're going to put that up on the cradle. And now we're going to put in our ice dub. Now, as I said, I don't want it to be too flashy here. I'm mixing, in this particular case, red and pearl ice dub together. I do want it to be fairly buggy, though. But although we're tying this today in sort of a red-white combination, these flies work great in natural patterns or olive patterns. So I'm just twisting up my dubbing loop, combing out the excess, but you can see we get a nice, bulky ice dub body. That's okay because the collar is going to streamline this for us. Afterwards, I lost my dubbing tool there, but that's okay. I recover it, lock that down in place, and you can see that we're just going to snip off the excess. So what I'm going to do is a second dubbing loop here. So I'm just going to do another half hitch to secure it in place. And I'm going to use a little bit more squirrel. I've just cut off a small section of the exact same zonker strip that I've tied the fly with. But I'm going to actually take off the leather. We're going to cut it off very carefully. This can be a little bit tricky. You got to hold everything in place. And I've just got the squirrel fibers, as you can see there. We're going to twist that up with our dubbing loop tool. And then I'm going to palmer that on and always preening those fibers back so that they go in a nice streamlined pattern. And you can see that builds a collar that covers a lot of the dub. And I like this because it just kind of gives the hint of red gills underneath the fly. Comb that out, get it nice and streamlined, get rid of any excess fibers that don't need to be in there. And then we're going to whip finish this off and we're going to be done with the front hook here. Now while I comb this out, we've got a little bit of time to talk about this fly. I mean, it's a quite short, compact fly. The bead that we have on here is just a standard brass bead, nothing fancy. We don't want this to really sink too deep. I'll usually use this with a sink tip or, again, trailing behind a heavier fly. All right, so now we're going to shift over, now that we've whip finished and glued on the front hook, to the back hook here. Now what I'm going to do is just put a little bit of a thread base on there, again with nano silk. I'm keeping it red here. If I wanted to, I could keep it white to make it a little bit less conspicuous, but I like the red butt here. And I'm just going to stretch everything out so that the zonker goes naturally across it. You don't want any tension or anything like that, but this will provide a lot of movement. Use a little bit of moisture, separate those squirrel hairs so you can get nice, clean access to the hide below it. And again, right at that part where it's going to tie on for distance. And I'm just going to lock that down with some very tight wraps right there, nothing too bulky. Now we're going to whip finish it and put some glue on, and then we're going to secure that in place. Now, I am going to often trim the tail a little bit if I feel it's too long. I just want a little bit of movement behind the back hook, but the proportions we have here, that looks nice. This fly's got so much movement. I like it as a winter fly. I like it as a summer fly. It mimics leeches. You could tie this in red colors and it'll actually mimic a lot of worm patterns. And you can go smaller or larger as you see fit. Keep in mind, this is a double hook fly, so make sure that for the regulations where you're fishing, you're legal to do that. But there you go, Ishiwata's Snitch. You can find all the materials that we've tied with today at bovertroutfitters.com. Thanks so much for joining us.